It is Friday, February 14th, otherwise known as Valentine's Day. This is Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News. This is another edition of Take Two. Maura Carabello in the house and Rob Axson, Utah GOP party chair. Thanks so much for being here.
You're dressed appropriately. We're not.
No,
we
we're
did
not. We missed
well.
the memo.
I have a lot of pink in my life, and so I was like, I'm just going to wear red and pink for an entire week, and I've done it. So
well done.
Here we are. Yes, I have this jacket that I love that I was waiting to wear today. It's kind of weird. It's probably too fashionable for TV because when you look at it, it looks weird. But the blazer's cut in half, and it's red on one side and bright pink on the other half. But I couldn't make myself do it. Every time I wear it, people email and they're so confused as to what's happening. And my mom's like, "What's wrong with the TV?" And I'm like, "Okay, I can't deal with that today."
Well, when you're ready, tell us, and we'll.
You'll be ready to support.
Yeah, we'll say, hey, looks fantastic.
Love it.
Love it.
So are we celebrating big today after the podcast, or what's up with the Carabello family?
My husband does it right.
He does?
I'm a failure. He's not, so he's got plans for tonight.
Oh, I love
In
that.
fact, he just texted me on the way and said, I'm just planning out the rest of my day. What's your schedule? But I have procrastinated some work, so.
Super cute. Oh, but now you've got a delay,
But yeah,
game delay.
He's handling stuff tonight.
And the Axsons are having a family
We
party.
do a family party. We lean into celebrating our 4 little kiddos.
I love that. I will be working this evening, but
Nice.
I will have a hot date with my husband tomorrow. And we're not huge into Valentine's Day, but we need to because we got married a week before Christmas. Stupid. If you're ever thinking that's a great idea, don't do it. There's not time. So we're like, maybe we should celebrate our dating anniversary. And we started dating on Valentine's Day.
Oh,
and then
nice.
Valentine's Day comes and we're like, this is expensive. There's too many people outside. So
That's right.
Yeah.
I feel it's too crowded. I'm like, oh, it's too crowded.
I know. So I'm one of those girls where I'm like, let's Netflix and chill, and I can be happy to go. I did. I booked some tickets that pleased myself at Hale Center Theater with
nice.
Little Women. I don't know that my husband's going to be thrilled, but he'll be having a great time with me.
I went to Little Women with my wife
How was it?
a week or two ago. Here's a confession. I had never read the book, never watched any of the
You
movies.
hadn't?
So it was my first experience. It was a good show. My wife cried at the end. It was one of her favorite books growing up, so it was a lovely evening.
That's all right.
And
It's
they
good
did a
to
great
hear.
job down
So
there.
you should expect your husband to cry.
Okay.
That's what I heard.
I'll bring tissues. Love it. Well, I want to get past the fun and games here and talk fun facts for a quick second before we dive into the legislative session and what Trump's been up to this last week. But Utah's population as of July of 2024, so we've grown since then, is 3.5 million, which seems like a lot because I was thinking in my head, okay, we barely made it to 3.2 million, but we are really just moving and growing. Our growth rate in the last year, 2024, was 1.5%, which was actually not as good as 2023, which was 1.6%. Maura, we're growing quickly and it's not going to slow down. Is that what you're seeing when you're working right now with projects and planning?
I mean, that's the mantra here is get ready for growth, get ready for growth. And the next thing you'll hear from almost everybody is you'd rather have a growth problem than a stagnation problem. So I think it's kind of nice that we're slightly below or slower than projections because our growth was so rapid and so fast. Now here's the bad news that we all know. One of the reasons we've slowed down is our housing prices. And we did not tiptoe into housing. We smacked it. And so we've got to figure out some inflationary, if you will. You've got to figure out how to make Utah by being affordable again. That's a trick. Also, these numbers are a little skewed by a slightly then higher adjustment for deaths during COVID.
Yeah.
So some of just statistically these projections are generated by economists, so they're generalities. And so there's a little bit of an adjustment for sort of the pandemic. And also, I think for most people, what I hear is it's a slight increment down, which is good news. If it slowed down too much, it would be bad news.
Yep.
But since it's just a little bit, and it is still, I think, a nice composition. We're not over-migrated, and you saw that happening in Arizona and Colorado, where they were over-migrated.
Right now it's 52 net or migration.
Yeah, and so you kind of you still want Utahns, I think, to make up Utah. I mean, this plays out where if you go to a Rockies game in Denver, there's more Cubs fans than Rockies fans. So you want to keep your home base a little bit, but it is nice to have a developing workforce that has moved in here. So I think those numbers are great for Utah State.
Yeah, and Rob, you mentioned the net migration. That's 52% of new residents, and the natural increase of Utahns having babies and growing up and being here, 48% of new residents. And right now, Tooele County has had the fastest population growth at 3.1%. But as we've talked about for years, Utah County's had the biggest number, the vast majority of the growth right now.
Utah County is just exploding, and as we all know, what's interesting in the next number of years, I think it's only in the next like 10 or 15 years, you'll have that point where Utah County actually goes and exceeds the number of citizens in their boundaries versus what Salt Lake County has. So it will become our largest county. You look over on that kind of west side of the county. Well, actually, let me go back. In Salt Lake County, I believe the numbers are like 52,000 undeveloped acres left to potentially grow into. That's it. You look down into Utah County, it's like 300,000. So there is a substantial amount of acreage still to be grown into. And so some of the challenges that we'll need to think through over the long term is what can we do to really disperse some of this growth? How can we kind of go and revitalize some of our rural communities and build out the infrastructure and the jobs and the economic opportunities that could see some growth elsewhere? Because otherwise, Salt Lake, Davis, Tooele, Utah counties, it's going to become quite congested.
And another interesting thing now is that St. George is a major metropolitan area. I mean, you're looking at them wanting to bump up county size. They easily are going to exceed 500,000 at one point in the area, the metro area. And so they've become this powerhouse in the South.
Yeah.
We're still treating them like they're this little bucolic place where
our little kids
go.
Yeah.
I think they're a little frustrated, us being the Wasatch Front. And so as Rob said, we'd be really smart. You saw 2 or 3 of the gubernatorial candidates this last cycle start to talk about, hey, listen, it cannot be 5 metro areas and 24 everybody else. We've got to start doing regional hubs. Yep. And there's a ton of Utahns who want to stay in their home community and just don't have the economics to do it.
Yep.
And so, I mean, technology, data centers, that should all be a part of our conversation.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. Utah County is going to be so interesting because it represents lifestyle change. I mean, Utah County used to be a thread of Main Street centric little town after little town after little town that were actually had some distinctions to them, and they're now blending together, and they're going to have to think like a metropolitan area, which nobody wants to, because I don't think that's the old school approach to it. And we all see this. You see over and over people think of themselves as rural. We think of ourselves as very sort of connected to rural America, and we're, in reality, we're one of the most urban states of the nation.
And yesterday, I don't know if you got snow or didn't get snow, but the southwest end of Salt Lake County and then the northern part of Utah County got hit hard. And when we went on the news last night, there were some people that are like, what are you talking about? There's no snow at my house. But there was about 8 or 9 inches of snow on the west end of like Harriman, Riverton, Bluffdale, and people who were using the Pony Express, Mountain View Corridor, trying to get to Eagle Mountain. There were people who left downtown at 2:30 in the afternoon. I was seeing on Facebook last night at 10:30. The spouses were still waiting for the other half to get home from work because it was such a mess, which tells me there was a lot of snow and a lot of people in one place, but the infrastructure we have for these growing areas doesn't seem to be keeping up with the need, because it was just too many people all at once. There was just nowhere for anyone to go, so it was a mess.
Particularly our east-west corridors, we don't have capacity enough on that.
Yeah.
But hey, that's why we also need more mass transit. I mean, we are going to need to adjust a little bit of our car driving throughout that, and I think this new expansion area, if we can do it right, if we can get some Olympic money, we'd be in good shape.
Yeah, and we need a test for that too, and one of the tests, I'm going to get to the Olympics in just a second, but one of the tests I think will be this spring when they open up for the first time in April, the ballpark in South Jordan, because that east-west travel just is not great. It's busy already, and so when you're moving huge numbers of people in for those ball games, are they going to use tracks? I hope so, because if not, it could be a giant mess there.
Well, I think too, it's also the element of where do you put the jobs? Where are those experiences? If it's always relying on how we've been traditionally, that you live elsewhere, but you come and commute to the city center, you're coming downtown Salt Lake or downtown into Provo or wherever it may be, that creates that need for traffic in the mornings and in the afternoons. If your job and your enjoyment, your entertainment, your recreation is all kind of concentrated in your area, you can solve for some of those issues. But truly, the growth we've already had has been tremendous. The growth we will have over the next 10, 15, 20 years as a state, we have to be very clear and proactive in looking at what we're doing to prepare for it.
Yeah, buckle up. And speaking of the future, Brad Wilson was just named as the head of the 2034 Olympics, which is starting, maybe I'm getting old, but like a few months ago that sounded forever away, but now I'm like, okay, 9 years is not that long. So an exciting job for him. Congratulations to him. Maura, good choice for this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice blend. They seem to have done a nice blend naming Brad Wilson as the CEO. Fraser Bullock, who was really essential to the past Olympics, is still in a major role. I want to say he's maybe the president.
Yeah,
Is
chairman
that
of the
right?
board.
Yeah.
So they all have good titles, and so I think Fraser Bullock will represent the continuity and the experience on it. Brad Wilson's a great choice because he, a former Speaker of the House, clearly understands government, but also a really successful business owner. And I think he is, I'm going to say new to the Olympics because, as we all know, there are many people who are Olympic professionals.
Yeah, they're junkies.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's new, and I think I love that combination of some continuity, but also bringing in new eyes. The other leader they named was Steve Starks, who I think is more in a committee role.
Yep.
I think you're looking at
I think
Brad.
his title was the vice chair, so he's assisting
Yeah.
Fraser.
Interesting, okay.
And Brad, and truly, I mean, congratulations to Brad Wilson and congratulations to the state. If we're going to go and invest this amount of effort to pulling off another successful Olympic Games, it's nice to know that you have people there thinking and coordinating and building a team that has the talent and ability to do that. Brad definitely, as was just mentioned, he brings a wealth of knowledge from various different skill sets that I think will be very well suited to this.
These Olympics are a little heavier list than last time. A couple of factors were really important to 2002. One is we were just post 9/11, so there was a lot of federal money for security, and there was more federal money, I think, for infrastructure. We have a huge advantage in that we have a lot of infrastructure, but we're going to have to raise a little bit more than we did before, and also we will, in America, we will have just hosted an Olympics in LA, and that's also going to make us hustle a little bit more for private dollars.
Yeah, no, it definitely, we're lucky being on the back end of that. It puts us at a disadvantage. From what I understand, there's a lot of pressures from some of the sponsors and whatnot to focus on LA and thereafter focus on us. But this is where Utah's well suited. We tend to do more with less, and we tend to rely quite a bit on our infrastructure and our cultural kind of social capital. So Utah's well positioned.
I feel like our connection to Diet Coke is pretty strong.
So we're good to
That's
go.
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying our soda connections alone
Should
Step
build
up
it, yes.
Coca-Cola.
And there's been a lot of talk over the years that LA hasn't kept up their infrastructure for the Olympics like Utah has, and some of that leftover money's been put back into it. So that while there's going to have to be more building for the actual Olympics, everything that we built last time is still in great form, at least from what I've seen, and ready to go.
Yeah, you have Italy, who's the 2026 winter. They are still building some of their venues right now. That's a little
Yeah, you're
stressful.
just a couple years away.
Yeah, and in the news world, we're waiting too, because NBC's contract for the Olympics runs out, and we're waiting to see if, maybe that moves to somebody else. I have a hard time believing at this point that it's going to change, because NBC has their own infrastructure.
As long as it doesn't move to one of the 27 platforms that I still now don't
Where
even
it
know
streams,
anymore. Like
yes.
it goes from NBC to, is it Tubo or something?
Yeah.
I'm not ready for that. If it went from NBC, I could maybe do a CBS
To another
Fox
network, yeah.
jump, but I'm not ready for it to
Yeah.
be something.
My guess is
On
there's
the
going to be a
side.
hybrid. I'm
Oh, for
guessing
sure
you
it
will
is.
have like
There's
an
enough
NBC
money
in
to be
partnership
found.
with a Netflix or
Yeah.
YouTube TV
Oh, and
or
we're going to
something.
stream the heck out of everything, which is the good part, because what you get into is the weird sports that you don't know.
It's
I mean,
true.
what I get into,
Yeah,
I should say.
that's what you'll get free on Tubi, the weird sports.
I'm going to go all in.
Yeah, if you want ice skating and top tier stuff,
Not
you're
a
going to have to
chance, yeah,
pay
prime time.
Apple TV your extra $20 a month on top of whatever. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Focusing now on Salt Lake City, which I know is frustrating for people who live across the state, because they're like, Salt Lake City doesn't run everything, but it is our capital city, and big news happening here right now. The Salt Lake City Police Department chief will be stepping down at the end of this month, from what I'm gathering from all the press releases and the wordings going out. This doesn't seem to be his choice. The mayor initially sent out from Mendenhall's office a carefully worded statement saying that Mayor Mendenhall is grateful for Chief Brown's work over the course of her administration, but has determined that it's time for the next chapter in leadership. So he is moving out. There's a lot of questions about whether this was her choice to do that, or if there was pressure possibly coming from the state and the Capitol and leadership there that have been worried about homeless issues. Rob, you've just been up at the Capitol today. What's the word on the streets? What are you hearing?
Well, I'll share a little bit about that, but also anecdotally my experience.
Okay.
I've lived in Salt Lake City a number of times throughout my life as a young kid, as a new college student up there at the University of Utah, as a newlywed, and then later on as a dad. And I'll tell you, the reputation that Salt Lake used to have of being a safe and clean city, we don't deserve that reputation anymore, and I don't know anybody who's around there saying that we have that anymore.
Whose fault is it?
I think there's a host of factors, but I'll tell you the reason that my family moved to Cottonwood Heights, and we still have our home, it's a rental here in the Avenues, but the reason that we moved, there was a couple of factors. One, we wanted a larger yard for our kids as they were growing older. I mean, you can't quite play catch anymore when you're having to truncate your throws. So a bigger backyard, that was important. Another thing though was there's only so many times that I can explain what my children are seeing walking to the library with me 2 blocks away of rampant drug use and violent criminality. I had instances of people coming and we had to call the police for people that were showing up at our doorstep. There's only so much that you can take before you realize something's out of whack here, and so there's definitely need nationally that we're seeing, and unfortunately here in Salt Lake City, to address the legitimate humanitarian side of those with chronic mental health or addiction issues, the chronic homeless issues, but also how are we responding to criminality. And I'll tell you, at the tail end of the time that we lived in Salt Lake City full time, we were told, unless you are being violently assaulted, we are not going to send a police officer there. File a report and come down and meet with us. And the thought that I had to wait until something violent was happening to myself or to my children, that was not okay with me.
Yeah, and I think that brought up a lot of the questions that we've been looking at and dealing with over the last couple of years about response times. Maura, you're in an interesting situation. You might be slightly biased. You happen to hang out a lot with the former chief and probably discuss what's happening. Your thoughts on this?
So, I think the good news for me is that the problems that Salt Lake is experiencing are easily adjustable by good leadership. So I think we have had a leadership failure. I think our response rates are double that of the national rate, which is completely unacceptable. And we are heavier staffed than we have ever been in Salt Lake City's history. So I have to tell you, if someone tells you that they need more cops to do their job, I would categorically disagree with that. This is a management issue. Our department hasn't been managed well. We have not had very good leadership. You see that in rank and file. I think being okay with it, moving on. So good news for Salt Lake is the homeless situation is manageable. The crime situation is manageable. The cleanliness on the streets. I think if we can get an effective good chief in there that will even just hit the national averages, we'll be back in a position of being the old Salt Lake that we used to know. I have a business in downtown Salt Lake and I live in Salt Lake City. And so I think the good news is I do think it's a leadership issue. And I think we've underperformed over and over, not to mention the unconscionable high record mark for use of force and the police actually assaulting and killing many citizens. And for a progressive city, that has to be an unacceptable position. So so I think it is a failure of leadership in this instance. But the good news is we have a chance now to do it right. And again, it's not unmanageable. You look at some cities in which the volume is just unmanageable. We're not in that position.
We're not there, and I'd add one other thing. If you look over the last number of years in the lead up to COVID and addressing the opioid epidemic and everything else, and especially after some of these instances of bad policing and egregious interactions with citizens that we've seen nationally, there was this cultural expectation to be a little bit kind of more lax on enforcement. Culturally, we've seen, in the most recent presidential election, this was a part of it. What we're seeing in our urban centers and across the country, this idea of safety is kind of returning to that space. So I agree. I think there's this massive opportunity with new leadership, but you also have this underpinning of an expectation of safety. So now we can discuss what that looks like, but the citizens have an expectation of safety that I think should be respected.
But you didn't see those problems happening in places where law enforcement was on top of it.
No, 100%. Leadership is the key
The failure
piece.
is not best practices in law enforcement.
So here's one of my questions. Is it a failure of leadership just from the police department or even above in the mayor's office? Because I look back to during the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter protests and riots that were happening all over the country, but even in our own streets of Salt Lake City, there were complaints from the Democrat DA's office that rocks were getting thrown through the windows, their building was getting breached, and there was an order of stand down that was coming, they said, from the mayor's office.
So Salt Lake City's mayor, the last mayor, and this mayor have both made a choice, which I think is a really poor choice. I think best leaders put best people in the positions and they hold those people responsible. And the key to it is that you elect a mayor for a whole host of reasons, but you have them appoint a police chief for a whole host of professional experiences. You rely on area experts and you let them do their job. Both this mayor and the mayor before disagree with that leadership style. She's been incredibly active in directing, and really not only just directing issues like you pointed out, but also she's been involved in hiring and firing. I think this is such a poor leadership model. I hope she takes a step back and hires a qualified person and lets them do their job. If they're not doing their job, it's absolutely on her to be accountable. But I do think one of the problems is that we have a mayor who wants to do her department chair's jobs, and I don't think that's a recipe for success. I'm also concerned about the rumor that I've been hearing. What's on the street right now is that they've already chose the next chief. I hope.
So there's no nationwide search going on?
I hope that this isn't true, and I will be very clear, it's a political rumor, but I hope it isn't true because Salt Lake City is an enormously attractive position. We've respected law enforcement here, we've funded law enforcement here, we have the equipment we need, we have the means we need, and we have a community that wants to participate. If the current mayor doesn't do a national search and doesn't, and if they only put lipstick on the search, we could attract so much good talent into Salt Lake City. And you could see a community first model here. And you could see a position in which we have a progressive city that also respects law enforcement. That is a perfect condition. And I hope that there's an earnest national search because I think there's so much talent out here we could drive. Rumor on the street is they've already picked somebody. Rumor on the street is that it is
someone inside the department?
Not from, what I'm hearing in rumor is that it is not from the PD, but it is from our community. That may be very well who rises to the top. I'm not trying to eliminate that choice.
Process.
But go through a national process and have it be public and have it be heavily scrutinized. We have a chance to attract talent, and it would be a bummer if we decided to not. I also think you have to look at merit. We have I'm going to put Trump in this group. I'm growing weary of elected officials who are choosing loyalty over expertise. And it is not helpful to the public dialogue. Loyalty should not be the litmus test. Expertise and the ability to execute on best practice should be the reason you bring people into your administration.
Yeah, I do just have to add to that, you have to have that expectation of safety. That has to be something that you're
Will you pull your mic up closer to your mouth? I just want to make sure we hear you. You're good.
Yeah, no, that expectation of safety. If you're a citizen in a community, and especially if you're raising a family or you're deploying an economic benefit with opening up a business or running a business, you need to make sure that your asset, your family, the thing that is most near and dear to your heart, is protected. And our city here fell short of that for far too long. This is the opportunity to fix that. And so I don't disagree with what you were talking about with merit and better standards and better leadership. Let's make sure there's also that understanding that the citizens here, the taxpayers here in this city, deserve to know with confidence that they are having the safety and the systems in place that can keep them safe.
We've been talking a lot about the capital city. It's a place that a lot of Utahns come for. You come for hockey games now, basketball games. Temple Square's kind of been shut down for a while, but sort of not breaking news coming out today that you can come see the temple again in 2 years. It's opening up, so mark it on your calendar. But the capital city matters to everyone because it's the heartbeat of our state. It's where a lot of business happens. Right now on Capitol Hill, Representative Casey Snider is running a bill, HB465, that would allow DPS to step in where there's safety concerns. When you read the bill, it's basically like Salt Lake City is the issue. Is this a threat, Rob, or is this a bill we actually need to consider where we bring DPS in to help with the capital city because it matters?
I think it absolutely matters, and where you're falling short, you have to have the ability to backfill. Like I said, the reputation that we all experienced 20 years ago of what Salt Lake City was, even getting back to the Olympics, the 2002 Winter Olympics, it put a very clear place on the world stage of here's a city that's well put together, that's filled with wonderful communities, wonderful people, volunteers, it's safe, it's clean. We've lost some of that reputation. Now it's the opportunity to gain that back, and with the changes that we're seeing in Salt Lake City, fantastic, we may be on that path. But if there's an inability or an unwillingness to rise to the occasion, I understand why the legislature would say, well, enough is enough. We need to make sure to backfill that because, again, this is our state's reputation. Oftentimes when people hear of Utah, it's either skiing, Red Rock, arches, or Salt Lake City. That's the three things that will come to mind, and that will be oftentimes their experience, even if they're coming to skiing. It's flying into Salt Lake City, it's dining, it's staying, it's recreating here in town, and then getting up onto the ski slopes. Their experience in our capital city will decide if they come again. It will decide if they move a business here. It will decide if they want to invest here, if they want to speak kindly of us. And not that we care what people are saying about us just on the function of caring about that, but it matters when it comes to the economy. It matters when it comes to how our state is positioned as a country. You have to backfill that if Salt Lake City is not able or willing to step up to the occasion.
I mean, I think you have to see this as a punitive bill. I mean, it's hard not to see this as a punitive bill. I think that the sponsor has gone out of his way to say it's not, and I think that while I feel like it's lip service, sometimes I think lip service matters. I mean, it is saying, hey, listen, we're trying to get along.
Yeah.
The mayor is also trying to get along. I think both the state and the city are trying to say, oh no, I'm working with you, I'm working with you.
No,
I'm not blowing that off. I'm like saying good for both of those entities for stepping up. I'm really mixed on this because I would love for the state to have had enough trust and confidence in Salt Lake City that they could have said, so let me see how you do, and then if you don't get it done, I'll bring a bill. Doing it in conjunction feels a little bit like they don't expect Salt Lake City to rise to the occasion. I mean, it's sort of, I would have liked to have seen the state. I do not think it is the role of the state to operate this way. The one thing I do like about the bill, if it is enacted the way it's written currently, is it seems to be an on-call. It seems to also nod to following Salt Lake City Police Department. The challenge is what we just talked about. If the police department is failing to do it, I'm having a hard time getting too sassy about the state coming in. It's not the role of the state to come in, it's not the position. So I resent a little bit that this is needed. And both of those things are true. It's not ideally how I think you should do it. The one spin I think you could say is that if the city stepped up from a law enforcement perspective, then the state has committed to resources. And that is something that the city has asked for over and over. It's not just Salt Lake's problem. Some of this is inherent in being a capital city, a metropolitan area. It's not because you're failing, it's because that's where the population lives.
Yeah.
And so I do think I like that the state is giving money. The big question will be, if there's a leadership vacuum, then the state's gonna pick it up. That's not their role, but the first part of that sentence was if there was a leadership vacuum. So again, I am optimistic that Salt Lake City can get a nationally well-known, informed, experienced chief who could lead us through this completely manageable problem. But it's hard to see this bill as anything but a stick a little bit.
Keep in mind, we're not a country made up of city-states. We are a country made up of states, and then there are political subdivisions. And I think this is the ultimate culmination of here's the warning, here's the shot across the bow.
Rob, one thing that's really important in the United States of America, law enforcement always has had a local jurisdiction. It's very different than every other subsidiary government. And you see that inherent in the sheriffs. Remember, sheriffs
the importance
are
of
independently elected.
Yep.
It's also the hard part about law enforcement and policing is that when you form a coalition of a bazillion individual entities. And so but it allows citizens, in theory, to have their authority, their police authority, to be deeply connected with their communities. And so it's inherent in law enforcement that it's local.
100% agree with you, and that's when that's working well. My point, though, is from a political subdivision perspective, the state has an obligation to make sure in any area that there is not something that is continually and perpetually failing. And so I think that this was what I don't know, and I don't think either of us know. Maybe there were conversations that were happening, and maybe there were warnings, and maybe this bill's introduction became necessary because things were not being met and expectations were not being met. But I do hope that this, both actions that we've been talking about that are happening with the change of leadership and also this bill will lead to an encouragement to find a solution that we don't have to see the state step in.
And we have seen the state step in the past when you look back at Rio Grande when they were there and helping, and the efforts worked at that time. Obviously that all dissolved and it hasn't happened anymore. So
and this bill learned from that. I will say this bill is not Rio Grande. This bill is in conjunction with the local police department, and credit should be given to the state for not repeating Operation Rio Grande.
Okay. Another thing, focusing out a little bit, going from Salt Lake City to Salt Lake County, but Salt Lake County just this last week at their council meeting approved a new sales tax to fund jail transportation improvements. We've been talking about how the jail bond was not approved on the November ballot, so now they're trying to figure out options and what to do. This was something that was allowed by the legislature back in 2018 where cities or counties can pick up on this local tax. So essentially, if you live in Salt Lake County, shop in Salt Lake County, you'll be charged 1 cent for every $5 you spend. That starts in July. And it actually adds up pretty quickly to $76 million annually, they say. And so that will be then sent to operate beds at the Oxbow jail, giving them more options. Maura, is this a good move that helps in the overall problem, or are jail beds not the issue?
I mean, Salt Lake County is between a rock and a hard place. Their citizens said no to a $500,000 bond, which was actually really good financing. I think it lacked education. So on one hand, you can make the argument that the citizens said no, and this political jurisdiction is ignoring it. The other is that when you look at polling, it appears as though the public is in favor of this. I like the sales tax option because it captures the spirit of Salt Lake County's jail system, which does serve a Wasatch Front purpose. It is also additionally complicated with a couple of bills that are looking at mandatory civil lockups with immigrants, which would increase the population. There's been a drumbeat by Republicans that Salt Lake County is releasing criminals. I think a lot of that is just spin. It's not quite addressing the reality of it. But the reality is we do not have enough jail beds in Salt Lake County. Salt Lake County is a major hub for jailing. The Marshal, they serve the Marshal forces. They are going to now, it appears, serve ICE, and we have the largest population. So I don't know that Salt Lake County felt like they had many choices. I do like the tax they're choosing. I think it distributes it beyond the citizens. Utahns like sales tax for some reason more than property, even though I would argue that they pay less on property. But we, for some reason, think property is entrenched, and we think that sales is in transit, is cyclical, which has not proven to be true. But I would expect that people like the mechanism. It absolutely creates enough of a revenue stream for some really smart bonding. Salt Lake County has one of the best bonding records in the nation, actually. So their bond rating will really help with this. I think they had to do it. They have a number of really aggressive bills coming their way, and to their credit, they're the ones who identified the problem. It's not a county that's not unaware of it, so I think they had to do this.
I think a key thing when you have a elected body, in this case, who effectively ignored the will of the people in the elections, they will have a fairly short runway now that they've decided to kind of supersede that and kind of revisit the situation. They better deliver on what they're saying that they want to do. And so I think that in the long run, over the next couple of years, you won't have a lot of pushback if they deliver on what they're stating that they're going to do. They've added the tax component there. If they deliver more beds and it contributes to the spirit of safety that we've talked about in the capital city but across the county, I think there will be an acquiescence and probably even a broad support from the public at large. If, on the other hand, 3 years from now we're in the same situation that we're in now and there's really not an answer, yet we're being taxed more, there will be some very strong opinions on that.
Well, the terms of the agreement, to be clear, wouldn't allow that to happen, just to be clear. And Salt Lake City has Salt Lake County has a significantly better track record than the state does on capitalized improvements. And so Salt Lake County is the premier organization in the state for capitalizing facilities.
No, but the
And
point
so-
though here is
and
building.
it's a different tax, which makes a difference. So I just think it's smart. I have no reason to not be everything but sanguine about the management ability of Salt Lake County to follow through on this.
And that's the opportunity that they'll have to deliver on. But the point is, if you don't deliver on what you claim is the need, while at the same time ignoring the will of the voters, that will create some political liability that they have. But if on the other
It
hand...
hasn't for state. The state does that time and time again, and there is no consequence to that.
Well,
So we shall see.
again, we're talking about political subdivisions, but Salt Lake County has a number of taxes. I know the taxes that we pay here in this county are a lot higher than most of the counties, so you have this added expectation, but you also have additional needs that are unique to our county. Again, if you rise to the challenge and you address the underlying need that the citizen identifies, I think you're in a good spot. If 3 years from now we feel like having additional beds and those resources are contributing to the safety that we feel here in this county, fantastic. We'll all be happy, myself included.
I mean, one could argue that they didn't feel unsafe, which is why they turned down the initial tax, right? I mean, if
I
people
think it
felt
was-
unsafe, they would have
I'll tell you
expanded their
that
jail.
the folks that I was hearing from, it was more a lack of confidence that this would solve the underlying issue. And so that's the point. If now this goes and contributes to solving the issue,
Yeah, and
you'll
remember,
earn a lot
who's
of
going to
trust.
exacerbate this is some mandates from the state. So that will exacerbate the need for jail beds because of civil detainment.
Speaking of mandates from the state, the House voted to streamline deportations of immigrants convicted specifically of crimes. The House approved this bill that facilitates the automatic deportation of immigrants convicted of violent misdemeanors. The bill would require county law enforcement to coordinate with ICE before immigrants are released from jail, which is interesting. I haven't paid a lot of attention to this, but this week I looked up a couple. We've had a lot of fentanyl seizures and drug busts, and I've looked up some of those people. And one of them I looked up, unless I understood what I saw on the jail roster, it looked like there was a federal detainer on them, which I was assuming from ICE, but at the same time, this person had put up a $10,000 bond and was released. And I'm like, why are we releasing people if they're here illegally, which I guess is what this bill would solve, but it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense for catch and release for fentanyl, which seems to be a big problem in our communities right now.
ICE needs to step up, right, too? I mean,
Yeah.
like this is a federal problem, and ICE is refusing to get along with our sheriffs, which is just ridiculous in a state like Utah. So some of it is, I think you have to recognize ICE's role in this. My main concern about the violent misdemeanors is that by and large, violent misdemeanors are in the category of domestic violence. And the challenge is, so on face, we all go, well, yeah, I mean, like, who what? Violent misdemeanor, nobody is like, let him out. Like, who cares? So there's nobody who is for violent misdemeanors not being held into account. The largest category of that is domestic violence. So what I'm worried about is bills like this, the practice of it. There's the highfalutin sitting in a room conceptualizing bills, and then there's what happens when you pass them. And I'm worried that this will have a chilling impact on people reporting domestic violence. So you're a girlfriend, he beat you up a lot, and you don't call anymore because you're worried about him being deported. You're in a bar fight, you're worried about the deportation.
If I was getting beat up, I would want them deported. I'd be like 911,
you
pick
would,
him up.
but that's not the way domestic violence
Yeah.
works. And so when we sit in a conceptual world and we don't live in a real world, there are unintended consequences that actually just victimize and make things worse. So in a real world, it may not work, and I'm concerned about the biggest subsection of violent misdemeanors is domestic violence. And you can't ignore that. You can't ignore that in a state who has a horrific track record on female and women's issues. And I just think, like, unless this bill gets serious about domestic violence carve-outs, then I think that this is just all virtue signaling and has no real teeth to help real people with real problems.
So I disagree. I think that this is not virtue signaling. It's recognizing the absolute need that we have to address the sheer volume of illegal immigration consequences in this country, and focusing first and foremost on those that are violently engaged, whether against a member of their family or against the community at large, I think is absolutely appropriate. I am sympathetic to what you're saying, though, of making sure that we're addressing the needs of a victim, especially when you look at victims of sexual assault, domestic violence victims. There is a power dynamic there that oftentimes leads people to behave differently than is necessarily in their own self-interest. So we should be open to looking at how to address that. and figure out ways to do that. But I think ultimately as a country, we've let this challenge metastasize for far too long. And we have far too many people that are engaged in victimizing far too many people, including Utahns, including fellow immigrants, and that has to be brought to a stop. And I appreciate that the legislature is looking to.
But you can't conflate the immigration problem by volume with criminality, because what we already know is the criminal element, one, is already held to account. Nothing is stopping Americans from arresting criminals regardless of their immigration status. So this whole I need permission to arrest a criminal doesn't exist.
But we've seen
you
far
have
too many
permission
instances of them
right
getting immediately
now
out.
to arrest a criminal right now, regardless of their status. In fact, you shouldn't even be checking their status, because criminal behavior in America on American soil is criminal behavior. So acting like law enforcement needs a reason to arrest criminals is just nonsense and political spin. The second part is, if you're really worried about immigration, the volume of immigration, those are all civil detainments. They have nothing to do with the system we're trying to overhaul right now. So it's like, choose your battle. If you're worried about the volume, then get a better paperwork system, which I have not heard anyone speaking of.
That's
if you're worried about the criminal, but no one's addressing that part.
No.
Everyone's talking about these criminals. Okay, but nothing is stopping us from arresting.
It's a triage perspective.
But we know that most immigrants don't commit crimes. In fact, who's more likely to commit crimes? Americans. Americans commit crimes at a higher level than immigrants.
I mean, I won't give in to the assumption that somebody completely ignoring our laws is not committing a crime. I recognize there's a difference between.
Have you ever sped? You're a criminal. Well, it's the same level.
And when I'm caught, I am given a ticket.
Right, but you're given a ticket.
But
so it's proportional, isn't it?
No,
isn't it proportional to the crime you're committing? I commit crimes all the time. I have a speeding problem. It's proportional. You want disproportional for a civil crime.
No, I disagree, because it's a proportional reaction when you have somebody who is coming in and benefiting from everything that we have as a country while ignoring our laws and not going through the appropriate process. I think it's disproportional to allow them to continue to benefit from being engaged in all that we have to offer without stepping out of the shadows.
The last record we have is in 2022. And in 2022, immigrants produced almost $100 billion for Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare expansion. So almost $100 billion.
Those are conflated issues.
No, they're not. You're saying it doesn't matter what they do when they're here.
No,
I just see them as criminals.
No.
Many of them, they're key to our working economy. And I think the Republicans right now are over-introducing the conversation of criminality to get rid of an entire class of people that are actually being really productive for the United States of America.
Wholeheartedly disagree, because if you're saying that we should treat all of the folks that are here on an illegal status, immigration status, illegal immigration status, if that's where you're wanting to address them the same, you can't at the same time then say, when Republicans and legislators and elected officials are trying to address those who are violent first and foremost.
Nothing is stopping anyone from electing. You don't need more laws to cut down on criminal behavior. Law enforcement has complete carte blanche to, whenever they see a crime, they can arrest it.
Sure, but identifying those people who have no business being in our country in the first place and are engaged in the violent acts.
That's not your money shot on getting criminals. That's called racial profiling. So if you want to find a criminal, look for a criminal behavior. What you're doing is wanting to look for a racial profile and thinking that will lead to a criminality, and there's no data that shows that leads to criminality.
This is merely requiring that there is a close coordination and engagement with ICE.
Between racial profiling and criminality, of which there is no data stream.
We're talking about folks that have been engaged with the law because they are
peddling drugs.
But you don't need a law.
Those laws exist.
What, in combating what?
Selling drugs, domestic violence.
But once they are brought into the prison system, once they're brought into the judicial system, identifying and knowing who they are, and no longer giving benefit to somebody who wants to come and treat so poorly the country that they
because you want the states to take responsibility for immigration status.
Well, no. The federal government is responsible for that, but when states or
we're talking about jails. This would instruct the state of Utah would instruct state employees to now have a vested interest in an immigration status. We're already talking about a system that is overwhelmed with data, and now you would like the state to say, one of the things we want to put on law enforcement, we don't want you to keep it's safer. We want you to also target by race and immigration status.
No, it
as
has
civil
nothing to do with race.
detention,
By immigration
as civil
status.
detention.
By immigration status, that's one more element that's fairly
So
easy
you
to
want the
track.
state to have that on their agenda?
The policy is set by the federal government.
No, this is a state law we're talking about.
No, correct. The policy of immigration status and
Yes, it
immigration
is the
law is set by the
responsibility
federal
of the federal
government.
government.
It has to then be engaged in a coordinated effort with the states.
So should the federal government give us money for this?
Oh, absolutely. The federal government needs to figure out and
Because I don't know if
iron
you
out
know
those
this, the federal
policies.
government now is firing those people. So you see the federal government drying up,
No,
you see Congress completely silent on this issue, and we're huzzawing that the state is going to rest on their backs now the immigration status of a citizen, instead of just focusing on the criminality of the person.
Firing inefficient, wasteful spending and programs and employees on the federal government is not equated to then enforcing immigration
You have
policy.
less bodies doing the work.
Well, if it's identified that these are bodies that are inefficiently wasting all of the finances and destroying the ability to actually
We
do the work,
identified that in the
more power to it.
28 days. Are we now arguing that in the last 28 days, there's been thoughtful consideration
Well,
of
hey,
status of an
It's
individual?
a good start. Let's keep going. I think there's plenty
Yeah.
of room for cutting on the federal government side that can then get to
This
the
is
heart of
state
doing things more
Republicans
efficiently.
capitulating
No,
to a philosophy that has
these
no
are-
data merit.
These
to
are
it.
state Republicans stepping up and making sure to protect the safety and the
By
communities
adding
that
an
they
unfunded
represent.
mandate to what the state has to do, which I disagree with.
Quickly
I
identifying
think
who
that law
somebody is.
enforcement should stay focused on criminal behavior and keeping us safe by keeping criminals arrested.
Absolutely.
This
And when-
brings into it a civil jurisdictional matter that we don't need to pay for, and the feds need to get their act together, and Congress needs to finally do something about immigration.
I agree with you on that the federal government needs to step up and that the Congress specifically needs to start enforcing our federal immigration laws.
Or even have
and create
a
process that
cohesive
is-
strategy.
100% agree with that. In the meantime, though, identifying those criminals that had no reason being here in the first place and working with the federal government
It's
to
an
make sure that
unfunded
they're...
mandate from the federal
But
government
that
that
is,
the
that
state
is
wants to
time,
pay for.
that is time, energy, and money well spent to keep this country safe and to keep it safe not only for American citizens, but for immigrants.
I don't
Those
agree
that are
that the
not criminals.
state should take on immigration. I think that is the responsibility of the federal government.
I like this debate. I didn't have this on the list, but I'm bringing it up just because there's so much passion here. I haven't really followed this, but there's another bill happening or moving through the process at the Capitol right now that Deseret News has been reporting on. Brigham Tomko was posting about this, saying that nearly 50% of serious crashes, specifically in West Valley City, involved an unlicensed driver in 2023. In 2024, nearly half of all solved hit and run cases where they figured out who did it involved an unlicensed driver, which says that there are some problems. That whole mesh of like the immigration versus carrying or not carrying is becoming a problem here in Utah, which surprises me because Utah allows anyone, whether they're legal or not legal in the state, to get a driver's, it's not license, what's the word for it? Driver's privilege card here in the state. And so I'm wondering why we have that problem. I'm also looking at insurance bills in our state for car insurance, which have skyrocketed over the last 4 years. So even though it's a federal issue, it's becoming state issues when you have problems like that. And so the question is how
So when
to
you
solve
can't
these.
microdata and then say it's a problem, right? I mean, you can't, that's a survivor guide. You can't take a city. So one, I would say, it sounds like it is a problem, but before that happened, we would have to look at the
Look
full
at a bigger
data set.
picture, yeah.
Because that is part of the problem with our dialogue right now is I'm cutting and pasting the stuff I like, Rob's cutting and pasting the stuff he likes, and we've got to slow our roll
Hashtag
a
your
little
side
bit.
sucks.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'll be a part of the system in that. But I do think that there are long-term rippled effects, but you still get back to the notion of, so are you saying that the state should piecemeal solve it, or in fact, Congress? Because I was against the executive orders when Biden did it, I'm against the executive orders when Trump did it. Congress is who is failing here. And the
That's a place
Republicans
you and
have
I
a rare
100%
moment
agree.
in which they have both houses, and so they should, because sometimes the structure just doesn't allow for solving. In theory,
challenge.
the structure allows for solving right now. In theory, this was the Republicans' biggest issue. And so let's get about the business of actually solving it. There are two sides to it. One is the criminality, which I argue is disproportionately being used to fearmonger, but the other part of it is administrative. And you would think that the greatest nation in the world could get their administrative act together, decide how and where you become a citizen and how you become a worker here.
And how to do it appropriately. And you look at some of the programs that the United States used to have that allowed for a migrant workforce post-World War II. There was a lot of benefit in that allowed people to come and go and to be known when they were here. And we moved away from that. And it's created some unintended, maybe intended consequences where now that's
For like the farm worker, like work permits that can.
What was it called? It was like the Barrasso.
Yeah, and
or
at the time that was still proportional, right? Like it was almost proportioned to our population, meaning we solved that problem then.
And it fit some of the workload during World War II. All of our young men were overseas fighting wars. You were able to backfill some of that. It was very productive. It continued on clear into the 60s. We definitely need to look at some of those, but I do agree also with what you said. A lot of the problems that we have is because Congress, under both parties, has abdicated its role to the executive branch. I don't think it was an accident that the founders put in the Constitution. The first article talks about Congress. It's not the presidency. That's the most important. It's accountable to us as a people. Article 1, Section 8, read it. Get to understand all of that. Congress has a role to take, and over the last number of decades, we've given far too much authority to the executive branch. It leaves us more dependent on and reactionary to executive orders. It should be returned back, by and large, to a deliberative body in the House and in the Senate that can move forward with the right policies for this country.
I would love to see it happen, but I'm already looking at the next bill that's coming up where they're trying to look at the budget, and the House and the Senate already have vastly different plans, which is part of the deliberative process. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, guys, like, let's get on the same page.
There's not a lot of hope there.
Yeah, is there like a camp you can go to for the weekend, have a pillow fight, and like hash this out and like come back on the same page?
Right.
So we're hoping. Oh my gosh, we've been talking for so long already, and I have so many issues. I want to just mention a couple other things that are moving forward. It looks like school cell phone smartwatch ban is clearing the Utah Senate, headed to the House. It looks like that's got a lot of support. There are a few options in there for if you have, like, for safety reasons or whatnot, exceptions for your kids. Are we both on the page that we like this, or one of you being like, flush it?
I'll just give
It's
some
America,
shout
let
out
me
to
have my smartwatch.
My household is split on this.
Ooh, they are.
Yeah, I'm for it.
Kids versus adults, or?
No, actually, adult on adult here. I'm for it. I think the parameters matter. I think there are some parents who have some reasons, and actually, they don't even have to be good in my mind. If a parent is really wanting their kid, I love
it.
A phone-free zone. I think that's terrific, and I think we should all think about phone.
So does the cop at your house want for safety reasons?
No, one, safety first, right? And the other thing with this cop is he's really just like, don't tell me what to do. And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what to do. Put that phone down. So yeah, we have a split household on this.
I think, look at the repercussions that we've seen in children over the last 20 years. I mean, none of us grew up with a cell phone. My first cell phone I paid for myself when I was a freshman at the University of Utah. And it was a big chunk of my disposable income was paying that bill. And text messages, I think, were like $1 at the time. So you didn't send many of those. You look now, suicidal ideation, depression, social isolation, all of these things have exponentially grown with the advent of two things. Social media first began it, and once you had a smartphone that put that social media into their pocket, they never have a reprieve from it. They never escape from it. And having this idea that that is okay without any type of parental engagement is something I would encourage every parent to engage on. Now, what you want to do, more power to you, like we just talked about. But now add that layer to the schoolroom. Other kids, other students' behavior is affecting my children, and vice versa. I think for the health of our country and these children growing up, focusing on ways to kind of separate that and create some maturity is worth the debate.
Yeah, I think lives could literally be saved by just trying to get rid of, for a certain amount of hours a day, the phones there. I've watched a couple older movies recently, and I forget how refreshing it is to see the normal problems of high school going on from when you'd watch, 80s and 90s movies where cell phones weren't involved and they were just getting into their old-fashioned hijinks
now,
and messing around.
Now, I get a little nervous when we go too far in that the phone is the problem, because the social connections are the problem. So that's the conduit for it, but it's a little too easy to blame this unknown thing and not take care of your own household.
100%.
And you said that, so I'm not, but I get too far in the lazy language we're all using of, the problem is social media. Because let's also note that social media has been a lifeline for kids who did not find a peer group around them and did not find acceptance in their household. And so it's complicated, but either way, I think we're overdoing the morality. For me, put your phones down. What we do know is your eyes are going nuts and your brain is going nuts and you are addicted and I'm addicted, and like, put your phones down is where I am.
Kids don't have the ability to navigate that. There's a
Neither
reason
do
that
most of us.
Oh
Like,
no,
that's-
100%. But at
telling
least
you,
I'm
like-
screwing up my own life,
Like
knowing I'm screwing
if it's quiet for a moment, you have this
No
nervous
chance.
tick where you grab for your phone and you're like, what am I
How
doing?
many
Why do I
times-
need this?
And have you ever noticed how many times, notice yourself, the behavioral studies show that the little buzz
Yeah.
you get, that Rob and I
It's
are
like a
in
drug
a
hit.
conversation, I'm totally listening, and I do this, and I suddenly am doing this. I wouldn't do that in normal life,
Yeah.
but we cannot resist someone maybe texting me. We've all got to get serious.
It
about
is.
100%.
Yeah.
how
Have to put it
bad
down.
we
I mean,
are.
think about this. There's those memes that you see, like, when I was growing up, I went off for a bike ride, and my mom thought I was just on a bike ride, but really you were, going through 3 abandoned buildings. You went
Yeah.
to the other side of
Yeah.
the tracks. You rode 14 miles, and you showed up just before dinner time. Like, that was what we lived in. We
Yeah.
didn't have this connection, and there was some self-reliance that it built, and some confidence that it built, and all of those things. And sure, there's convenience, and there's good things that come from this. But there's things that we need to be concerned about all around. And in the classroom setting, when you have these kids that already don't really know
Yeah.
where they fit in the world, feeling constantly connected here and not paying attention to what they're supposed to be learning, I think there will be lasting effects that we'll have to deal with as a country if we're not careful.
Absolutely. I think a story, I guess 6 years ago when my daughter graduated from high school, where I took a group of her friends, there was 5 or 6 of them, and we took away their cell phones for a week. It was only a week, and I think it ended up like 5 or 6 days. We didn't actually go the full 7 days. But yeah, we gave them flip phones instead of cell phones, so they still had something if they had to call people or work or do whatever that they needed to, just to see what happened. I did pre-interviews and post-interviews, and while we did this, I didn't ground myself from my phone because I needed it from work, but I tried to be more cautious and conscious of what I was doing. And I was surprised by how often I was reaching for my phone just because my brain was bored for a minute. When we interviewed the parents and the kids afterwards, they said even that 5 days, their kids were willing to do dishes. They grabbed a book off the shelf. They were kinder to their siblings. There was just all these just little minuscule things where they were like, life seemed happier. And it wasn't like they still couldn't call their friends or do whatever. They still did. But it definitely made a difference. So I don't know. It's a little something we can all think about.
Maybe that's the perfect Valentine's challenge for everybody listening. Put
Put
the phone
phones
down a
down.
little bit, connect with your spouse,
Yeah.
your significant other, your kids.
For your
Have a little bit
overachievers,
more
do it on
conversation.
President's Day.
Yeah.
For those of you who really want to achieve big,
Yeah,
put
all
it on
weekend.
President's Day.
If you're going on a date tonight, I do not want
Put your
reports of
phone
your
down.
your phone out during
I'm
this
going to be
dinner.
Instagramming my. No.
Your what is it? Your food eats for your phone
Oh,
eats
yeah,
first. That's what
that's
it
right.
is. You got to take a picture. One other headline I wanted to talk about real quickly is there's been a lot of safety going on, but there's also a lot going on the Hill right now, trying to figure out housing, which is a major issue for people. There's 2 housing bills that have been halted aimed at allowing for smaller homes. It seems like the fight to me right now is whether the state can be making these decisions or cities and counties need to be deciding what's best for their own communities. Rob, what are you hearing from people when you're out and about? Do they want the state to solve this, or do they want their cities to hash it out on their own and go to council meetings and figure it out?
I think they certainly like that it's being discussed, and they like and appreciate the recognition of elected officials that the affordability right now in our state is very difficult when it comes to housing, whether we're talking rents or mortgages. It's an onerous challenge to figure out how to navigate, especially when you're thinking about your kids and who comes next. I mean, we've all seen it. Like, if you own a home, you can look and, wow, I could sell it for a lot of money. But where could I buy? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter what I could sell it for. There's nothing that
If
I
you
could
can
afford
camp in your
thereafter.
mom's backyard.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think people appreciate that, but there are 2 things that I'm consistently hearing, and that is a desire for local buy-in, that there won't be policies that go and demand of every municipality what it needs to look like, that having that local control matters. The other one that I'm hearing a lot about is free market principles, not wanting to get too far from these free market principles, that there may be some unintended consequences, that we're addressing affordability, but in the long term, we're just adding money to the equation, and it itself becomes inflationary.
So I have to start out being cheeky just because you said free market principles. I'm like, oh, the free market left when half our legislature was developers. So, okay, I think the hand's on the scale there. But going back to affordable housing, I think a couple of things that are good that are happening. One, for our listeners who are keeping up, they'll already know that these bills have been held in committee and they will not be passed this year. So this is just a really good discussion. What I liked about the discussion is it has a good bill drafter. It's got someone who's listening and who's taking. The other rock star that I don't always name names, but I really like Steve Waldrop. He is the governor's affordable housing guy. He's a former member of the House of Representatives, and he's good, and he knows what he's talking about. And Steve Waldrop actually testified in favor of both of these bills at committee, and his was that this was incremental and it was little, and the principles were really important. The two principles that they're really focused on is having smaller lot sizes, which allow for more density but also smaller houses, and also as accessory dwelling units. Accessory dwelling units, if you've lived in a city who's having this discussion, brings up a lot of feelings.
Yeah.
And so, but they're really going to be key components to having a diversified housing market. The other thing that this does is change the socioeconomics of a neighborhood, which a lot of people are afraid of, and I think was the cornerstone to traditional America, in which you weren't just defined by your house size, you were defined by the communities you wanted to live in. So these are all really important principles, and more importantly, they're going to be key to solving our affordable housing problem. These were smart solutions, these were good solutions. They are competing against what Rob said, and I'm going to say I think that local control is very important. Who put the kibosh on this bill, rightly so, was leagues of cities and towns who just said, oh my gosh, we cannot have the state do a one-size-fits-all for Cousharam and for West Valley. It's not going to work.
Vastly different.
But the principles are going to save both Cousharam and Salt Lake City. Affordable housing is not only a density Wasatch Front issue. So I think being so smart about it and so wise about it mattered. The other note that came up that I think is worthy of consideration, the argument against local control is not in my backyard, and that you have the settled current citizens, and we're all sort of snobby going like, we're good, we don't want you to come in. So there is a fault of local control in which you have a tremendous amount of bias about how you want your neighborhoods to live. You also have a tremendous amount of buy-in to what you want your neighborhood to look like.
Well,
but I do think we should leave room for the space that says for you communities who will not start thinking a little more agilely about who your neighbor is, there might be room in the future for the state to come in and say, we need you to either take it into your own hands or we will. Now that's not happening this year. Again, both these bills are being held, but the principles brought in these bills make a ton of sense.
Buy-in and community, those are two words that you shared that I really like, and we need to be thinking through. So obviously addressing affordability of housing is massive, it's important, we need to do it. But I hope that throughout the next couple of years as we're addressing these conversations, we're also thinking through building of community and building and incentivizing or creating the space where that buy-in can happen. Because it's one thing to just dormitory style have everybody have a place to lay their head at night. And yeah, they have a home, but if we're not creating that space, that old American traditional value of homes and communities and neighborhoods, whatever those neighborhoods look like, they could be apartment neighborhoods, they could be condo neighborhoods, they could be home neighborhoods, doesn't matter. You still have a benefit of that in this country that I would hate for us to lose here in the state of Utah. There's some interesting articles you can go and look at, research done once we moved away from front porches and the size of front porches. And a lot of that, interestingly enough, was once the advent of air conditioning. A lot of the need for a front porch was to go and enjoy the evening air, and you had that opportunity. You saw the kids playing on the street.
Yeah.
You saw your neighbor across the way. You talked to your neighbor that's sitting out on their porch to the side. We've since gone inside to watch TV, to be air conditioned. Porch sizes have shrunk through the years ultimately in many cases they've all but disappeared. That has been detrimental to communities. And so I would like for us to think about that as we're solving the issue of affordability, or in the example I brought up, solving the issue of comfortable air temperature. Let's think through what is the unintended repercussion that is undermining the creation of community.
Make porches great again.
Yeah.
I love a good front porch.
Good bill, though.
Yeah.
A little before its time, perhaps, but
Yeah.
good bill.
I think opening the conversation's good. And before we leave, real quick, lightning round, I just wanted to mention on the national stage right now, two former presidential candidates on the Democratic side, Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., were sworn in this week. Trump made a call to Putin. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, went on a plane last night, was headed to do some negotiating with Ukraine and try to figure out if we can end a war there, which is good news, hopefully. And nearly a dozen lawsuits are going on right now, holding Trump's actions up in the courts right now. Maura, what?
I'm just grateful we ran out of time.
Yeah.
We were able to deep dive on Trump. That's my gratitude moment.
Is there anything you like right now, before we let you go, because it's
About
Valentine's
Trump
Day? Yeah,
or
like,
life?
no,
I'm
you've got to pick
optimistic
something about Trump
what I
right now.
like.
Is there anything where you're like, okay, high five, you're doing that well, or you're shaking it up in an
I
interesting way?
am mixed on his choice to go slightly more blonde with his hair. I don't know if I hate it. So, I'm still thinking about
Hey,
that.
that's a good start with you.
That's like your best
We
ever.
will build on that.
Okay, I've given you
We
something.
will build on
It
that.
is looking lighter, and I've been wondering
Yeah.
if it's because he's going grayer, because some people go white, and like there's just nothing you can do about
No one knows who
that.
his stylist is, and I'm not speaking to the choice of the haircut. But in looking for something, I'm not hating the golden blonde.
He might need to go less tan then, because sometimes it looks like his eyebrows are
The
disappearing.
contrast is getting a little
Yeah.
high, but I was going positive. That was my glass.
Oh, that
half
was
full.
good. I love that.
We will start there, and I'm confident in 6 months we'll have a few more added to her little tick mark.
On the opposite end, you get to do your I love Trump something, but is there anything negative when you're looking at it thinking, oh, I wish this is something he was not doing? This is self-reflection from a
Please tell me
Republican.
it's holding press conferences with somebody standing with his kid in the Oval Office.
So I haven't watched that one yet, so I can't speak to that one. But I will say I did see a photo, and a couple of months ago we talked in the lead up to the election about this shift in the parties and how much of a shift occurs and how much those parties change these next couple of years will be interesting. So to that end, there was a picture I saw yesterday. I don't know when it was taken, sometime the last day or two. Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Donald Trump. All of these people were Democrats, and now they're all here, either Republicans themselves or a part of the Republican administration. I don't
You
think
guys
RFK
really
has
let
changed.
yourself get messed up, didn't you?
Well, it's just an interesting reflection that there is a lot of movement that is
Yeah.
happening right now in the political scene, and where that goes in the next number of years will be kind of indicative of election cycles and all of us as a culture. I like the idea that the Republican Party has room for people of various perspectives and backgrounds. I'm excited to see it. Certainly, we are on this sprint right now with action taken from President Trump. I think President Biden was definitely far more lackadaisical and slow and I'll be kind, maybe deliberative. We'll give him grace. Maybe he was more deliberative in some things or not. I don't know. But definitely the pace of things is very different. Where that goes, I'm very hopeful for. I've liked what I've seen from President Trump so far. I haven't run into something that I'm too concerned about yet, but when it happens, I'll certainly.
Is there anything that you love where you're like, hit me in my veins with that?
Well,
That's what the kids
fact
are
that
saying these days.
When I graduated from high school, not all that long ago, we were $4 trillion in debt, and we're now $34 trillion in debt. It is unsustainable. And I have, for all of my adult life, been a fiscal conservative. I like that we are going and looking at ways that we can trim the size and scope and cost of the federal government. I think we need to do that. We need to do it deliberatively. We need to think through the unintended ramifications, but right now the intended ramifications of a giant government is to continue to bankrupt my life and completely obligate my children and grandchildren to an unsustainable future. I don't want that. So I'm grateful that we're changing that.
My sexy Valentine's Day wish is we get back to the 90s and the Clinton era too, where we're just not deep in debt and we're just like, oh look, we're balancing our
Yeah.
checkbook.
Yep.
That'd be good.
Democrats last time we had a good fiscal policy.
High five, Bill Clinton.
High five.
Well, Bill Clinton went with Newt Gingrich and some Republicans. So
Bill Clinton, though, got it done economically.
He got a lot done. He was
did.
handing out Valentines all over the White
but
House.
keep in mind, the budget constitutionally required has to start and be passed in Congress. So we have to
So
give
true.
credit to both of them. So I did like the
Teamwork makes the
compromise.
dream work.
They did a good job back then in the 90s.
Yeah,
on
we're not going
balancing
to
the
see
budget.
that this
Yeah.
year.
Well, thank you for both of you taking part on this Valentine's Day, seeing the world differently and yet willing to come together at the table and break
put
some
our phones
gluten-free
down.
bread.
Put
Yes.
our phones down.
And
I
talk
know.
about the importance of front porches.
That's right.
Absolutely. I know I had my phone out a few times because I was double checking a few things I was looking on, and there was breaking news during this. We knew this, but the mayor, Mendenhall, of Salt Lake City, has admitted she did fire the chief. So she's no longer mincing words, yes. So there you have it. Truth serum is coming out now.
Strong,
Yes.
correct leadership is needed, and where it's not there, replace it.
Thanks for hanging out with us on this Valentine's Day. Tell someone you love them, or at least be nice to them today. Reach across the aisle. We'll see you next week.
She